So thanks very much for joining us. Today we wanted to talk about a framework we have been applying for the last 10 years or so. And so we'll talk through that briefly, but what we really wanted to talk about is some of the learnings. So I'm just going to share my screen. I've got a few slides to share with you. We'll just talk that through. So I'll put that on presentation. That should work. So hopefully that's fine. Very good. So what we want to talk about is our collaborative pathway. What does collaboration look like? And really the key things is some insights, some of the things we have learned in applying that over quite a number of years. So we'll talk a little bit about the history, where it came from, and its application, and really the things we have learned in its application. So some years ago, we thought it was useful to reflect on just some of the stuff we were seeing out there. Was working with a lot of clients. Many were facing complex problems, and some were successful. Some seemed to get to solutions, and others seemed not to work so well. And that really got us curious, and we really wanted to know what was that bit in the middle. What were those projects that were really working to work together to tackle complex problems? What were they doing? How were they doing that? And we reflected on our own experiences. We looked at others from around the place, and we thought we could see a pattern. And I'm just going to talk through that pattern. And we call it, well, we often do this starting from the end. So we might call it the backwards logic. So those projects that were successful, they were successful because people found lasting solutions. In the face of complexity, lots of stakeholders, they got there. And so we want to look at that. And what we found, one of the things we thought we could see was that those solutions that were lasting were ones that were created together. So they were our shared solutions. That's fairly straightforward. But what was really interesting is what made that possible. And it seemed a really key step in that was that we had some ownership of the how. How are we having this conversation? How are we working together? Have I got my fingerprints on how we are coming to solutions? Or am I just being railroaded into your process? There's a real important distinction there. It became clear to us. So that was really important. This designing process together was critical. And so what enables people into that conversation, importantly, seemed to be the sense that we recognise we've got a problem. There is something that we have to tackle. We have shared a sense of what that problem is. So once we've got that sense, then we can start to talk about the how. How will we tackle this? What's the solution? And it became clear that in order for people to stop talking about solution and to have the conversation about the problem, they needed to feel that this was authentic, that people were committed to this, that this felt genuine. It was genuine. And the thing that sent the clearest signal around that was that the proponent and the stakeholders believed that we have to do this together. So if you like, that's the backwards logic of the framework. And it sort of emerged just from studying what seems to have worked. And so we took that, and if you step through it forwards, it looks something like this. We start with dilemma, we go to solution, and there are 5 steps in the way. We're committing to doing this together. We recognise we can't do it on our own. We take some time to understand the dilemma, understand the problem. What is the situation we're facing? We co-design our process. How are we going to work together? What does collaboration look like for us? We work on the solution. We deliver the actions. And you'll see from the left and the right-hand sides of this that, I mean, this again has emerged really clearly over the last decade or so, that the more we work on this together, the more trust builds, the more we trust each other. And the better we do this, the more capable we are to work like this on the next problem and the next problem and the next problem. So working together builds trust, builds our capability, and it provides a bit of a way for us to tackle problems together. So that's the pathway, and that's how we arrived at the pathway. And so 10 years ago, we stepped bravely out into the world, and this is what we were doing. And we've been helping clients walk this walk for some time now. What I wanted to share, though, are the three most, I think for us, fundamental things that we have learned in that 10 years of doing this. And the first insight really is that the key part of the framework are the first three steps. These are the pieces that matter. Just the more we do this, the more we see that. So if we go back to the framework, the commit, the co-define, the co-design, this is where it's at. This is where it happens. This is really where the energy comes from. We need to be building our commitment to work together, and we need to be doing that always. Understanding the problem is critical, and co-designing. So if I think about that co-define step, it really struck me some years ago working with a client who had a waterway that was really struggling, poor water quality, Ramsar listed wetlands at risk and at danger, lots of political heat on the problem, and years of being unable to solve it. So I had a call from the manager, the regional manager, and her task was to fix it. She'd been given that instruction. So fix it. And she'd been working on it for years, and all her stakeholders had been, trying to get stuff happening for years as well. And so it became clear people would knock on her door and say, what we need to do is this. And the next person would come in and say, it's all about this. This is what we have to do. And the next person would say, this is what we need to do. All we need to do is get them to do this. And after enough of this happening, my client began to think, this is intractable. I don't know what to do here. I don't know how to go forward. And so when I got there and I was talking to her about that, I sort of asked, do we understand what the problem is? And it became clear that, well, probably we don't. And so that's where we started. And, it seems really straightforward and obvious, but don't underestimate our ability to think we all know what the problem is and all agree, and in order that we leap to solution. So all we did was get people in the room, and we talked about what is it we're facing here together. And everyone, the 30 or 40 people in that room, had a different idea of what the problem was, and that was an absolute light bulb moment for everyone. You mean you think it's that? Oh, I hadn't thought about that. And then we did some work on, so what is the problem? And that simple day in the room together really unlocked the process and made progress possible. And 3-4 years later, they're still working on that. They're still making progress, and is much more solution focused now because there's a shared sense of what this problem is. So co-define is critical to success. Co-design similarly. And John, I think you've recently been talking about co-design with some of your clients. You're on mute, I think, John.
Yep.
On mute. So I guess my experience there has been that people seeing their fingerprints on whatever you're doing, that they own the process, and actually makes them more likely to own the content, the activities you're working on. Example I had some time ago was a strategic plan for Queensland, and they said, well, we'd like to do it a little differently. And they said, how could we actually get people involved? They said, well, rather than trying to involve people on the content, why don't we involve them in the process? Why don't we actually ask people, what questions should we ask people about the strategic plan, which normally government would do in-house? So they've got 400 people in a room in Mackay, and actually said to people, we want you to create, if you like, the process or part of the process, which were the questions. And it was amazing the amount of ownership the group felt that they had. And somebody said, you came up with much better questions than we could have as government. It was like, they tapped into the creativity, but not just about the content, but about the process. How do we want to do this? What questions should we be asking? Made a real difference to the outcome because people felt a lot of ownership and they were telling stories about how this is our plan, not somebody else's plan.
So it's all about fingerprints. That's kind of how we are thinking about it these days. Has everyone their fingerprints on the process, on how we are doing this, not what we are doing, but how are we having this conversation?
Because if it's on, if it's on how you're doing it, you're likely to have more fingerprints on what you're doing. So you actually get more ownership of content, we've found, if people feel that they've been part of designing the process.
Yeah, and what I've seen often is when people are missing that step, what they're really doing is collaborating to people, not collaborating with them. They're coming in as, we want to work with you, and this is how you are going to work with us. It's actually a sort of controlling, command and control mindset in what should be. So to collaborate with people is to collaborate on process. To collaborate to them is to ignore that and think we know what the process should be. So it's a subtle difference, but it's really clear how much difference that makes.
And I think we've learned something there, Stuart, about that commitment too. Oftentimes people have sufficient commitment to get started, but perhaps not wholehearted. And what we find is if you actually involve people in understanding what the problem is, and people start to get their fingerprints on the process, commitment increases. So the commitment grows through the process. It's not about get commitment and you're okay. Some people will be reluctant, some people will be keen, some people couldn't care. I think you need sufficient commitment to get people in the room to want to do it together. And then as you involve them in the process, we find that commitment increases and that people more willing to step in and do the stuff that needs to happen to tackle these issues.
Yeah, which is actually quite a nice segue to the next insight. And again, at one level, this seems pretty obvious, but at the same time, it's really important to keep in mind. And while we have the 5 steps, and they provide a really good, I think, for me anyway, sort of map of the journey strategically. So we need to be doing this, and this. What we have found is that the journey is perhaps a little bit more like snakes and ladders than just a ladder. These days, we draw it a lot more like this. So it is an iterative process. And this has emerged just as much from asking our clients how they see it as from our own experience. It seems to intuitively make more sense to people that it's almost cyclic. There is something about going back and forth. And when you think about it, that makes a lot of sense. What we have found is that commitment seems to be critical. Whatever else we are doing, wherever we are in this process, asking ourselves constantly, what am I doing to build my commitment to this process, even if it's hard? Are we all committed? How do we know? What are we going to do to increase our collective commitment to doing this hard work together? That's a constant question. So it sits there at the heart of the collaborative process, if you like. But in terms of the others, we can start anywhere, go everywhere, is how we're starting to talk about it to ourselves.
And I think the experience is that oftentimes you get invited in at co-design or co-create, and people say, let's find the answer. And oftentimes it's you start wherever you can start, but it's paying attention to all the elements. And so now we've seen it as much more a creative process, an iterative process, and you, as Stuart said, start anywhere, go everywhere.
Yeah. So, typical examples of that would be co-defining the dilemma. 10 years ago, we were thinking it was both necessary and even possible to get a really neat understanding of the problem we have to tackle. We just thought that was important and an obvious part of the process. I guess over 10 years of doing it in practice, we've learned that, well, you probably can't. You probably can't ever understand the problem, particularly when you're facing something really complex like this water quality issue over there. What is the problem there? Well, there's all sorts of, there's politics, there's people, there's, elements, invisible elements that are really going on around that. So we talk about co-defining as much in terms of co-understanding, building our understanding of the dilemma. And one sure way to help us understand the problem is to try and solve it. So if we're up here creating solutions, implementing them, inevitably that shows us something more about, oh, that's interesting. I've just learned something about what's really going on here. We probably have to go back and do something about that as well. So the more we tackle the problem, the more we understand it. So there's back and forth iteration there all the time. And if we're tackling something complex, then it's clearer to us that the co-delivering and the co-solutions are almost two sides of a coin, where we're coming up with ideas, potential solutions, we implement, we test, we try, we pilot, we learn, we go back, we tweak, we iterate. There's a constant back and forth between trialing, trying, and refreshing, reviewing, continuing to solve. So there's absolutely an iterative process throughout this journey. It's much less step by step by step. It'd be nice if it was that simple, but the reality is we could be at any place in this model at any time. Do you want to add anything to that, John?
I guess my experience in trying to co-define dilemma, I had a group and we said, let's nail this dilemma. We had a couple of options. Let's have another go at it and see. And what happened is the group energy dissipated as we tried to get more specific. I guess a big learning is it's really just about acknowledging people will have different views. It's understanding the system as well as you can. Then you try and nudge the system in the direction you want to go and come back and find out more about it. So we would now probably write this as co-understand the dilemma much more than co-define the dilemma. I think it's good to actually have a go at what is it and listen to everybody, but not trying to nail one dilemma. It's like, it's dilemmas. It's complex. That's why you're in this space.
Yeah, that's right. I've had the same experience. Too much focus on nailing the problem can be a distraction in a way. So brings us to our third, and this is, I think for me personally at least, this is a more recent thing, but it's increasingly powerful in my own practice. That the 5 steps are there. They're good, as I say, for that strategic map of the journey. What will this project and what's the journey this project will take us on? And I can see the steps. But more and more, because we've been using this framework for so long, it's kind of soaked in, and I can't shake it, and I can't forget it. I can't put it down. So these 5 steps, and particularly those first 3 parts, they're rules of thumb. I use them all the time. They're my principles. I just can't help but look at the world through that lens, even on the micro scale. So whenever I'm working with people, or whenever I'm supporting clients to work with people, even in the next meeting you go to, are people committed to whatever the conversation is you're having? Do they see the problem? Do you all know what you're talking about? What is the problem you're there to face in this meeting or this project, whatever it is? Do we all have our fingerprints on how we are having this conversation today or this week or this month or in this organization around that issue? These are rules of thumb that I find really powerful for my collaborative practice, because if I'm always asking, do we own this process together? Then that's more likely to ensure that we're constantly testing and checking for those fingerprints. So I can't stop working in this way, and it's been quite interesting to just to be part of that evolution of my own thinking from, you know, big picture framework down to really small picture heuristic, if you like. It's just guiding my practice and my thinking. And that's increasingly what I'm doing with clients, is helping them think this way on a constant basis. So again,
I think after a while it starts to become automatic. Certainly got some clients that now constantly ask the question, what do you mean we can't jump to a solution yet because we don't even understand what we're doing. So it almost also becomes a bit of literacy, common language. So it just stays in people's minds as, so how are we together on this? Do we need to just spend a little bit of time checking because we've got somebody new in about the problem? Okay, we'll think about process. So it's just a consideration of how have I asked somebody else about how we should do this, rather than, because we tend to always do it on our own. The one about the my versus our, stepping away from the jump to I know what the answer is, because we're pretty passionate about that, and very much the one about how are we actually making, who are we inviting in to make this happen, rather than expecting. It actually frees you up a lot too from having to do it all, which is often a frustration that people have, is why do I have to dump it all on me? Well, perhaps you're not asking some questions about and inviting others in. So I think this is very much about inviting others in, or to all those steps, is part of that heuristic Stuart talks about.
Yeah. So look, that's all the content that we wanted to talk about. I just wanted to put that in a bigger context, if you like. So we've been talking about the pathway, and it's one of the three cornerstones of what we would think of as authentic collaboration. And we've come to see it in three parts, or three legs of the stool, if you like, to mix our metaphors. So today's been about the pathway. We want also next time to talk about the skills you need, the skills and tools of collaboration to walk that walk. How do you co-define the dilemma, for example? What does that even look like? And what does co-design process look like?
Because we often find, don't we, Stuart, that people say, oh, I like the pathway, it's gold, but geez, I can't do it. So we've sort of spent some time working and recognising that it's the skill set that's also important. Great to have the map, but you need to have the tools to help you go on that journey.
Yeah. And so we'll be talking about that in a little more detail in a month's time in our next webinar. And then in 2 months' time, the third and perhaps most important one has been another learning for us, is about, are we thinking like collaborators? So what's the mindset that allows us to use the skills so that we can walk that path? So that's where this conversation will go over the next couple of months. And that's really the work we do, is help people think and act collaboratively so that we can do this together, whatever this is. So we've got a couple of minutes left. I'm very happy to take questions. Feel free just to unmute yourself and go for that, and then we might just close out. But yeah, anyone got any questions, or has anyone got any observations or reflections on your own practice around this?
I'll happily jump in, Stuart. Can you hear me?
Yes, thanks, Rachel.
I just love the way you've broken it up at the end into those three sections. It was just such a great reminder, but the pathway, skill set and mindset, but also just to remember that those are the three important parts that you need within the pathway. You need all of those things to make a good pathway. So it's great to have those three categories. I love the way you've broken it up, but also I think a few slides prior to that was a great reminder for me to ask those questions along the way as we collaborate. That they were great for me I have to keep asking those questions to myself and to others. So thank you for those.
Great. Thanks, Rachel.
I think just a point, Rachel, just go back, Stuart, that previous one about does everyone have their fingerprints? Even after working with a client for a long time, it's so easy to slip back into what you normally do. We're talking about something about how do we get people engaged if they're not going to be in the meetings. And I said, have you actually asked them what process am I? And they were there sort of hitting their head going, oh my God, John, how could we have forgotten? So I think it's sort of, it's nice to have those reminders, and it's hard work because we're so used to just doing what we do that sometimes just having those reminders in front of you each day can be quite helpful in building a different capability.
Yeah. Anyone else? Any thoughts, any questions, anything you'd like to challenge or query?
Yeah, Mary Moreland here from Ottawa. And, you know, I think really like the way you've presented it, Stuart and John. And I think it goes to, for me right now, it's that idea of trust and building that trust and how long it takes to build that trust. And certainly working inside an organization and try to encourage people to do this and to take the time. And I think it drives me nuts to watch people not make progress as quickly as they might if they would just step away and have some of those discussions. And if they don't have the experience of that, and I really miss, I was in a lab for 4 years, like in, you know, that kind of government lab setting. And we had a physical space that was different and encouraged people to do those things. And I think that's an important part of the role that we often bring in consultants like yourselves to do. For some reason, I think it's to give us permission to do the things we should do. Yeah.
Yeah, look, that's interesting. So 2 things. One is you reminded me that we often talk about going slow to go fast. So asking these questions, it can take time, means we're talking more, but actually it's doing the work faster. It's setting us up for more success. And if you think about those first 3 steps, commit, co-define, co-design, spending time there, it's an investment. It's not a spend, because we actually move more quickly. But we don't give ourselves permission. And you're absolutely right that a lot of what we do is what we call coaching. And so we just force an hour of people's calendar, busy diaries, and they just take an hour to ask themselves these questions. They could do it without us largely, but it's the rigor and forcing us to reflect on our own practice that seems to be really important and powerful for people, because somehow at work we can do that.
Yeah, I think, Stuart, every time I coach a group or an individual, they'll always say to me, I didn't have time, I didn't want to come, John, I don't know what I'm going to get out of this. And at the end they go, you just let me stop and think with some different questions. And people really value that, even though it's rather challenging in the environment of busy. I haven't got time to stop, but geez, when I do, that was valuable. So I think it's encouraging people. They're dead right, Mary. How do we keep encouraging people to take that time out to reflect and ask some different questions of themselves and others?
Yeah. So that's 1 o'clock. I like to respect people's time. Is there anything else anyone wants to add before we wrap it up? Okay. So thanks. I really appreciate your time. Just note there, we are starting to offer a special rate. You know, if you want to talk more about this, if you want to think about how does this apply to my situation, or how could I, or if you want to drill a little deeper into that, give us a call. We're happy to give you some time at a sort of special offer rate for our fabulous webinar participants. So get in touch, and hopefully we might see you next time as well.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks, guys. This is great.
We'll send you a recording as well.
Lovely.